No. Hello, William.
Hello.
Hello. Can you open your video?
Yep, for sure. Give me a sec.
Yes, so that
Recording in progress.
Oop, it should be showing anytime soon. Oh, why is it not showing at all? Is it not on yet?
Yes,
Kind
it
of
is.
funky. All right, awesome. All right, I assume that you guys can all see this. So, today's talk, when I received the email, I was a little bit freaked out because I was like, oh, I don't think I can prepare for a lecture, for like half an hour lecture in like a week, right? And then I just remembered that I actually got a paper, that is already in production, and it'll be published pretty soon. I think in the coming months, probably in August. That's actually pretty similar, you know, as an introduction to Indonesian hip hop, and to introduce your students, Monica, to Indonesian hip hop and Indonesian you know, music culture, popular music culture in general, right? So the paper's name is Tracing the Genealogy of Indonesian Hip Hop and Documentation of Four Phases. I'll explain what I mean by that later. But before we start, I would like to first acknowledge Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional owners of the land on which Aramati University stands. As a member of Aramati University, I respectfully recognize elders, past, present, emerging, and future. Okay. So a little bit about myself. My name is William.
Hang on a second, William. Sorry.
Yep.
We're just having some technical difficulties. I'm just trying to show so that the students can see on the screen the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint's not showing, that's all.
Ah, it's not showing at all.
The PowerPoint to us.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me try stop sharing. Does that work?
Yeah, we have been having problems with the Can I ask Belinda, would you mind turning off your video and see if we could see the share? No, it's just you. Okay.
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 All right. Wait, let me stop sharing.
Keep sharing. Keep sharing.
Oh, sorry.
Keep sharing. I'm going to show the on here the. Yeah, can you see that? All right, now they can see. I've just turned my screen around because the big screen's not working. All right.
Okay.
Okay. So your face is behind them, but the screen is in front of them.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Zoom is just not working really well for me usually. For some reason.
That's all right. That's all right. Zoom people can see both you and the PowerPoint. Is that right, Belinda?
Yes, I can see both.
Okay, wonderful.
All right.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so let me continue. So my name is William Yanko. I'm currently a PhD candidate at RMIT. I have submitted my thesis. When did I submit my thesis again? I submitted my thesis at the last week of February. So I think it was like 26th of February. My thesis title is Mapping the Politics of Indonesian Hip Hop. I'll touch a little bit on what I did in my thesis, but this talk itself and the chapter that will be published very soon is actually a part of my thesis, a small chunk, an earlier draft for my thesis that was written, I think, 1.5 years ago. I'm also an author. My book has just been published in Indonesia. It is called Rap Sopan, Menilik Hip Hop Indonesia Periode 1990-an, where I talk about how Indonesian rappers at the time in the 1990s, they had to actually change their music styles. They had to change their lyrics to help evade the government censorship, to help negotiate and to help, you know, to help people listen to their music, listen to their protests, listen to their soft protests without actually getting arrested by the police or by the Indonesian government back then. I have a few other published works that are coming out pretty soon as well. I got a book, An Introduction to Indonesian Hip-Hop, which I am hoping to release probably mid-year 2023. A few other peer-reviewed works are coming out pretty soon as well. So fingers crossed, if you guys are interested, check it out later in the year. So what I want to talk about today is one of my thesis chapters and one of the things that'll be published really soon. It is called Tracing Indonesian Hip Hop from the late 1990s to the current millennial era. What do I mean by this? The paper that Monika sent to you all is a paper. I think it was a conference paper, if I remember correctly, on one of the group that actually talk about as well, the Jogja HipHop Foundation. But as I was writing my thesis, right, I came to a realization that a lot of people are writing about specific musical act, right? Specific rapper or specific rap group. Most of the time, you'll find people who wrote about Jogja HipHop Foundation. You can probably find at the very least 5 to 6 papers that are written about Jogja HipHop Foundation. But what I'm actually interested in is how do hip hop in Indonesia actually came about? What actually created hip hop in Indonesia? There is no way that people just took hip hop from the US and move it around, right? You guys study Indonesian pop culture. You know that pop culture in Indonesia is significantly different when compared to the one in Australia or the one in the US. So I started with that question in mind, and I went through with my journey. Now, as I did my fieldwork in Indonesia, I studied the scene for roughly 2 years. I conducted a year-long ethnographic study. I'm an anthropologist. I went there, I asked people, I listened to a bunch of music, and I talked to people. I talked to these rappers. I asked them, hey, you are a senior rapper. How did you get started with hip hop? And why did you start rapping? Why did you start breakdancing? How did it all get started, right? And throughout those journey, I actually found out that there are 4 phases in Indonesian hip hop. The entrance, which was late 1980s to the 1990s, and then a period that I call the stagnation, the 2000s era, the incubation, 2010, 2016, and maturation era, which is 2016 onwards. There's a really interesting thing that I realize more and more as I'm doing the research, as I'm talking about them, and as I'm writing more about them, which is Indonesian hip hop actually resides and actually evolves around Indonesian socio-political context. A little bit contrarian to what is happening here in Australia or in the US or even in a close neighbor, say in Singapore and in Malaysia, right? Indonesian hip hop keep getting a new sort of scene, a new style when we change our president for some reason. It's a question that I still want to answer, that I wasn't able to answer through this research paper. But let us get started. As someone who grew up not in Jakarta, so I grew up in a small village in the jungle of West Borneo, where until I moved to Melbourne in 2009, we did not actually have any internet. So we had dial-up internet, the old internet, where whenever someone call your house, the internet will get cut off, right? And we barely had any electricity back then. We had 8 hours of electricity per day, and that's about it. Like you don't even have electricity when at night to do your homework or like to play with the computer. So I came from a place where I didn't know, as I was growing up, as I was in high school, I didn't know what hip hop was. I didn't know what people said what people meant when they said, hey, have you like listened to these artists when you as you're growing up, or hey, did you do any breakdancing? Like I didn't know any of them because I did not have any access to them. What did I did have shows music that were widely available in Indonesia. So the style of dangdut, keroncong, Indonesian pop. I had those access because we had TVRI, which is the government official, government funded TV station, right? I am not sure if this works or not, but I'll give it a shot. And you tell me if you can tell some trends, some techniques in this song that actually resembles hip hop. Let me know if it plays or not. Can you guys hear the sound?
No, did you can you do share sound from your end?
Ooh, how do I do that? Share sound. Yes.
Yeah, yep. Share sound. Yeah.
All right. What about now?
Yes. Yes. Oh, good. So this is dangdut, yeah?
Yep. Dangdut plus keroncong.
So very mixed music, Indonesian country song, country music. Yep.
Alright, it's coming.
Apabila cinta suka di hati, bola mata sesat buta memandang, melihat api seperti air dan melihat air laksana api. Meskipun banyaknya nasihat asmara, namun tiada satu pengobat rindu. Telinga pun tuli, mata jadi buta, begitu panasnya demam asmara. Mulut pun bisu, lidah pun keluh. Karena cinta, mulut pun bisu, lidah pun keluh. Karena cinta.
Alright, you can tell that the music sound, the background sound, like the backing track is Indonesian. It's Indonesian dangdut, right? And even the first part of the song was basically sung as your typical Indonesian pop music, Indonesian pop country music, right? But towards this part, right in the middle, was actually one of those style of singing that became the catalyst of Indonesian hip hop. Back then, they didn't even know that, hey, you can actually do that. You can actually, speak in such a manner, sing in such a manner that you can spill out a lot more words. You can fit in a lot more sentences. People didn't know that. So when I talk to many Indonesian, like older rappers in Indonesia, this was the first song that they always mentioned. They always said, hey, a lot of people say that I'm the godfather of Indonesian hip hop. And this was when I talked to Iwa K, right? And Iwa K told me that, hey, I am not the first Indonesian to rap. Have you ever heard of Farid Haja? And that was when I discovered this music, this song. And the second one is the one. Yes. Many of you guys might not be familiar with Benjamin Sueb. He's a local Betawi from Jakarta. He is an influential, highly influential artist. He plays in, he played in band. He released his own singles, albums. He was a star in so many movies in Indonesia, in so many TV shows. Look at him as, how do I say it? He might be the Neil Young of Indonesia, right? Again, I was talking to many Indonesian dangdut singers, right? I was like, hey, when you guys hear people rap in Indonesia, what do you feel? When you hear people like grabbing something that might not be your own style of music, what do you feel about it? And the answer actually surprised me. They're like, we are not surprised at all because we are pretty used to this style of music. I was like, how can that be possible? Because we all know, right? Rap, hip hop came from the US, came from the Bronx. DJ Kool Herc organized a block party for his sister's birthday party, right? And then they told me, you need to check out Benjamin S. Webb. So this is the second one.
Men, kena apa kok susah amat sih? Jangan ditanya. Ini soal apa? Soal sawah sepetak. Oh, Siti Marsitol.
Cintamu butek bagaikan air sungai Ciliwung yang mengalir kuning di pusat kota Betawi. Walaupun kata-katamu indah bagaikan syair lagu Rinto Harhab, anak Medan yang tinggal di Peluit Sakti. Kau permainkan aku bagaikan anak kucing mempermainkan bola bekel di pelataran rumahmu yang sempit itu.
You can tell, you can hear that the way he sing his lyrics is not per bars, right? He sing it as if he was rapping. He was using Indonesian language, obviously, but he was fitting a style that at the time was extremely unknown, that at the time was so weird, so out of place in Indonesia. And after I listened to those two songs, as I was doing my research in Indonesia, I started to think about that. I started to think, hey, these two artists were really prominent back in the late 1980s and early 1990s. But these two people could not possibly be the only catalyst, right? There must be something else. There must be something deeper that actually encourage young people who might not be familiar with music to hip hop, right? Not everybody likes music. My parents, they don't really like music even until now. But what are other things that could possibly create a wave of Indonesian hip hop enthusiasts in Indonesia that created Indonesian hip hop culture right now? And what I found was in the late 1980s and 1990s, Indonesian hip hop scene and Indonesian pop culture in general embraced this pirate culture, like pirating. They saw something that was interesting in the US or somewhere else, and they created their own version of those things. And the catalyst of Indonesian hip hop that I found was this poster right in the middle. So Gejolak Kaula Muda. Any of you guys have ever watched the movie Wild Style, released in the US in the middle, I think 1983. This movie was released in 1985. If you watch it, it was precisely a copy of Wild Style. Yes, they weren't swearing as much. They didn't actually, use any of the clothing styles that people were using in wild style, or like the gang culture, or the other aspects, or the other socio-political, socio-cultural aspects that were portrayed in wild style. But what they did in Gejolak Kawula Muda was they took hip hop, they took breakdancing culture, and they tried to create a portrayal of hip hop culture, of breakdancing culture, and basketball in Indonesia, in a style that could actually appease people who are not as well educated, people who might not be able to speak English, who weren't as familiar with English, right? So that's what they did. They took this one movie and created their own version. When I spoke to the producer, Muhammad Firmansyah, of this movie, right? He was actually shocked. He was like, "Hey, how did you know about all of this? About this movie, right?" And I was like, "Hey, did you not know that a lot of people actually said, like even Iwake, the man portrayed on the right side, he said that your movie was actually the catalyst. It was the thing that made him want to rap in Indonesian language." So that was the entrance. At the time, hip hop in Indonesia was a copycat. They took something that was interesting in the US and they tried to portray it in their own sort of style. I send you guys the playlist that you need to listen to. Some Indonesian hip hop songs. You'll find there an artist called Iwake or Iwa Kusuma. He is the one who is widely considered as the godfather of Indonesian hip hop. But when I talked to him, he was like, "No, I am not. If you want to say who the godfather of Indonesian hip hop is, you need to talk to either Muhammad Firmansyah, the producer of Gejolak Kawula Muda, that movie, of which the poster is right in the middle, or you need to talk to those two people, those two singers, whose music we just listened to earlier." And it was interesting for me because it was different. When I listened to it a little bit more, and this was back in 2016 when I was doing my honors at RMIT. I wrote my thesis on Indonesian hip hop in the 1990s. What I found then was that Indonesian hip hop in the 1990s was extremely polite. They didn't want curse whatsoever. Second, the topic that they covered was extremely tame. They didn't talk about any of the socio-political oppression. They didn't talk about, sexual violence that's extremely prominent in Indonesia, right? To the point where people were celebrating that we can finally have the sexual violence bill, which is awesome. But at the time, they weren't able to talk about it. If you listen to any of their music, especially this one album that I put in on the left side, Pesta Rap, out of all that 10 songs, there was only one song out of 10 that actually talked about socio-economic issues in Jakarta, which was the side B, the first song in the side B called Kaum Kumuh, that talked about how terrible it was to live in Jakarta in the 1990s when you didn't have money, you didn't have any educations, and to the point where you didn't have any future in your life. So that was the entrance. But what happened after that? I'm sure you guys are familiar with what happened in 1998. Before then, Indonesia was under a military dictatorship. Suharto was a 5-star general who ruled Indonesia in with his iron fist, right? He ruled Indonesia from 1966 to 1998, and he held a really tight control on the distribution of pop culture materials, pop culture products. He was then dethroned in 1998 by students' movement across Indonesia, where thousands and thousands and thousands of students went to the street and start rioting, just start destroying stuff and demanding Suharto's resignation. At the time, people were highly spirited, right? Young people back then thought that, hey, we are fighting for something. We want something. But in the 2000s, after Suharto fell, many of these youth, many of these rappers who participated in various socio-political movement to help overthrow Suharto was confused. They thought to themselves, after Suharto fell, what should we do now? What can we do? This great big dictator has fallen. Our mission back then was to overthrow him. Now that we have a democratic government, which was, totally arguable even until now, what can we do? These people, these young people, which at the time might be around your age, so they are roughly 19 years old, 20 years old. They were fresh from high school. They didn't really know what to do. They didn't have the fun to go to uni. Started to work. They went to work, right? They started working and they left hip hop. They realized that hip hop at the time in the 2000s, especially in the early 2000s, was a barren area. It's a barren space. Nobody wanted to invest in hip hop. Nobody wanted to pay rappers any money whatsoever because they thought that rappers, hey, you are just rapping. It didn't require any skills whatsoever, right? So that's what they did. In the early 2000s, there was a stagnation of Indonesian hip hop. At the time, there wasn't any music, like actual music songs released. You got a few groups that kept on releasing music. So for instance, the paper that you guys read on Jogja Foundation, the group was established in the early 2000s when a group of youth started to think that, hey, we have been rapping in Indonesian and we've been rapping in English. But can we start rapping in Japanese? And that was when they, like these people, initially there were, I think 5 of them. So 3 different groups, 3 different prominent major groups, major hip hop groups in Yogyakarta started to get together. They started having events every single week. And they realized that, we need to create a foundation. We need to create an institution where we can train people to rap in our own language. And they created Jogja HipHop Foundation. These 3 other groups that I put on your screen right now. First, on the top right side is Neo. On the bottom right side is Sakala. And the bottom left is Homicide. These 3 groups all came from different areas of West Java. But at the time, in the 2000s, when you talk about hip hop, you talk about something that came from Yogyakarta or Jakarta. Those 2 are the poles in hip hop, the North Pole and the South Pole of Indonesian hip hop. There truly wasn't much in the 2000s in Indonesian hip hop scene. Nobody actually released much songs. Nobody really released much events. It was somewhat dead. But after that came the incubation period. These people that talk about, they started to work in the early 2000s. Mid 2000s, they started having families, right? In the 2010 to 2016, there was this period that I refer to as the incubation period. People started to feel that, hey, now that I have a little bit more money, I have a little bit more free time, I have my own business, I have worked in a major corporation where I now hold a pretty comfortable position. What can I do to start rapping again? When they asked themselves that question, what popped up was the incubation. They started to realize that my time might have passed, but I can actually do something to help Indonesian hip hop to grow themselves. So they started recruiting people. they started creating their own labels. For instance, these four artists and groups on the screen might seem normal, right? They are prominent rappers. If you talk to any Indonesians, even perhaps you as well, Monika, if you tell them, hey, do you know Psychology? Online talking about Facebook, right? His songs were everywhere. Everybody knows who he is, right? But what he did was he created his own record label and he created a mentorship program. And what he did actually encouraged a lot of these other more senior rappers to do that as well. They started creating their own labels. They started creating mentorship programs all around Indonesia. So during this incubation period, a scene that was the South Pole and the North Pole, so Jakarta and Yogyakarta, became widened. Hip hop became spread out during this incubation period. Yes, there wasn't as much music releases back then during this time period. But what I was able to see, what I observed, was that there were a lot more younger people who became interested in hip hop. And I was one of them. I started listening to Indonesian hip hop in the 2000 in early 2012, I think, when I listened to Psychology, which was pretty new, pretty interesting way of rapping, and it caught me. I didn't realize Indonesian hip hop could be that good, right? Back then, people were rapping a lot about, like poppy stuff. They were rapping, but most of the content was pop music. They were singing about love. They were singing about love stories in high school, which when you're done with high school might not seem as relevant anymore, right? You want something that's a little bit deeper. And that was when I was hooked with it. Now, this period from 2010 to 2016 was extremely important because what came after that was the maturation period in Indonesian hip hop. Many of you might not seem familiar with the name, or most of you might not be familiar with the name and the person. But the man on the top left is Young Lex. He is an incredibly interesting personality. He was a rapper who started many businesses, and he is now a pretty major businessman in Indonesia. He has his own record labels. He has his own merchandise stores. He has his own marketing agency, and he has a lot of things. But what made him so incredibly important, and I hate to say this because a lot of people don't really like him, for Indonesian hip hop, is that he was the first millennials who dare to say, hey, more senior rappers, your time has passed. This is now our time. This is the time for the millennials and the Gen Zs to start doing their own thing. He called himself Young Lex, the one on the left side. As you can see, he got his own throne and his own crown. He called himself Raja Terakhir, or the last king. What he referred to when I talked to him was that, hey, I am the last king of Indonesian hip hop. I'll be the one who will create my own dynasty, of young people's dynasty in Indonesian hip hop. I will overthrow all the people in the scene and I'll create my own. He is such a controversial figure in Indonesian hip hop, to the point where you still remember Iwake, right? The dude that I said was the godfather of Indonesian hip hop. Young Lex, in his attempt to overthrow Iwake, published a video where he said that Iwake was only famous at the time because he had no competitions. He said that Iwake was a terrible rapper who if Iwake is still active to this day, which he still is active, will not be successful anymore because the last king of Indonesian hip hop is here. That might not be an important thing. It might seem pretty normal to all of you, but for a country that's still quite conservative, for a country that still holds onto the idea that we need to pay a lot of respect to the older people, to your seniors, what Young Lex said was just doesn't make any sense, right? It didn't make any sense. Why would this young dude, who at the time was still yet unproven, at the time he has not released more than an album, he was still a young player in Indonesian hip hop, and he dared to say that. But because of Young Lex, it encourages a lot of people. For instance, a feminist rapper called Ramen Girl on the top right hand side, and we get comedians. We get comedians. These two brothers who are YouTube personalities, Instagram stars, who release music every single election cycle, making fun of the presidential candidates on the bottom left-hand side. And then we got a full-blown YouTuber who ended up saying, hey, I don't want to be a YouTuber anymore, and I want to be a rapper, called Reza Arab on the bottom right-hand side. So what Young Lex did in 2016 was so incredibly important that changes the whole scene. Indonesian hip hop entered a new era, the maturation era, where people started to do their own thing, where people actually said, hey, we don't need to follow the older rules, the old rules, what these more senior, older people said, and we can do our own thing. So what did I learn from writing that chapter that turned into a publication? The first one, Indonesian hip hop is still growing. Even after my research that looked through the last 40 years of Indonesian hip hop, I still think that I have yet to see a properly established hip hop scene in Indonesia. It is still growing. Almost every single day, I talked to a radio announcer in Jakarta. He told me that they got at least 50 new rap songs every single day. And that shows that the scene is still growing. We have yet to grasp how different it will be, say, in 6 months or in a year. The second one is that the academic discourse surrounding Indonesian hip hop is yet to be well established. You got a few people who have written about Indonesian hip hop, but the scene, the academic scene itself is still really new. It's not mature yet. I will say that we might be, in our junior high, so like year 7, year 8 sort of stage at the moment. But there are so many other crooks. There are so many other areas of Indonesian hip hop that are still yet to be studied. So if any of you guys are interested in that, I do highly encourage you to look into Indonesian hip hop, to start writing about it. And the third one is what I said previously at the start, is that Indonesian hip hop revolves surrounding the socio-political trends of the era. 2016 was the year where presidential election happened in the US, and then Indonesian election also happened like 2 years prior, if I remember correctly. And there were so many socio-political discourses that were going on at the time that allowed these young people to express themselves. And from what I can see, and from my current research and a paper that I'm currently writing about gangster rap in Tanjung Priok, Jakarta, is that the scene is still revolving so much. What I wrote for that paper that I presented today to all of you might not be relevant anymore in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, because there are so many things yet to be discovered, yet to be uncovered by people. We still need people to write about them. And the last conclusion that I had after I wrote all of this is that there is a notion that's keep being repeated whenever people write about Indonesian hip hop. Is that Indonesian hip hop is a new niche sort of subculture, but as you can see from this presentation, right, it is not new. People have been rapping for ages. People started rapping in the 80s, even in the 70s. All these Indonesian dangdut singers were rapping. They might not call it hip hop, but the way they sing their song, the way they pronounce their sentences were rap. So that was what I found. And that brings us to the end of my presentation. I hope you guys had fun listening to that, and I hope it brings some new light into what is Indonesian hip hop and what is Indonesian pop culture in general. Any questions?
Thank you there, William.
Thank you.
That was wonderful. I actually wanted to hear more. Oh, we've got like multiple videos there, but I do want to have the students ask questions if they do have questions.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I'm going to give it to the students first before I might have one or two, but let's hear it there. So we've got those on Zoom as well as one here. Does anybody here in the classroom have a burning question? No, you want to give it to the Zoom people first? Okay, those on Zoom, I can see there's Chris there with the video. Belinda, you can put your video on again. Sorry about that. We were just trying to figure out. Oh, there's multiple there. William, can you share again so that we don't have multiple videos? Just share your PowerPoint again.
All right, for sure.
Okay.
I'll do
Maybe
that.
your conclusion one might help. Yay, that's great. Okay. All right. So anyone on Zoom want to start? Open your mic. I think Chris is talking not to us. So we've got Belinda. Belinda, you wanted to?
Yeah, I'd be interested
question?
to hear, if any of the Indonesian hip hop artists have had much success overseas.
I guess the most successful Indonesian hip hop group would be the Jogja HipHop Foundation. They tour Europe, they tour the US. They were sent as one of the Sultan's retinue. So they accompanied Yogyakarta Sultan to various sociocultural excursion to, I think, Eastern Europe or something. They were extremely famous in the US to the point where they were invited to tour the US for, I think, like 2 or 3 months. But apart
when
from
was this?
I think it was in the early 2010s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Early 2010s. Yep. Rich
Brian. Anybody heard of Rich Brian? I know that is in your Spotify last list, the one where I put an expletive language warning because it was just like F.
Yeah.
F. Songs were the one that you gave us, but I know Rich Brian. Have you heard of Rich Brian? Anyone here? No one's heard of Rich Brian.
Oh wow, he was at Coachella.
Coachella is a big. That's a US. Yeah. He's big in the US. Yeah. But maybe here. Anybody into rap or hip hop? Kind of. Yeah. You know Coachella. Yeah. But you're into more what kind of hip hop?
I'll don't listen to it often enough to just sort of whatever it is.
Pardon?
I don't really listen to it.
Don't listen. Oh, okay. Yeah. Do you want to show Rich Brian what he looks like?
For sure.
He's actually Chinese Indonesian, and he raps in English, right?
Yep.
And he raps all about being rich. Maybe that's why his name is called Rich Brian. Is that right?
Yes, let me.
It's all about
let
the
me
money.
Oh, are you guys seeing the screen?
No, we're still seeing your conclusion.
All right, I'll try sharing the screen. All right.
So he's like really famous recently. I know just before the before COVID, he used to do these YouTube videos, right? About eating spicy food, eating Indonesian spicy food, and the most like, yeah, he's there. Is that him? Yeah.
That's Brian. Rich Brian is an interesting figure. So he first got extremely famous in when he released That Stick. So I think there was a song that I put in the playlist. All right, it's difficult to call him an Indonesian rapper because while he is Indonesian, he didn't get big in Indonesia. So he never actually performed in Indonesia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So before his video blew up on YouTube, no one in the scene actually know who he was.
Okay. So
yeah,
not really like Indonesians don't kind of celebrate him as an export kind of, Indonesian export, not like Jogja HipHop Foundation. Yeah?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, what you were saying before to Belinda, they actually accompanied the Sultan of Jogja, right? So there's still a kingdom in Jogja and there's a Sultan there. It's a special region, Central Java, and he goes on tour. They go on tour with the Sultan.
Yep.
In early 2010s. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So that's because they also rap in Javanese, the local language. Yeah. So is that part of like because of regional autonomy, that kind of pride in the region post Suharto, that kind of early 2000s. That's why they created a Jogja HipHop Foundation, because in your presentation you said, we can actually hip hop in our local language. Is that sort of part of that revival? Yeah.
Funny that you asked that because I actually got a paper on that as well. It's currently being peer reviewed in the I think Australian Journal of Anthropology.
Congrats! Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. Hopefully it'll get published soon. So what I found when I studied them, right, and when I did my fieldwork in Indonesia, was that these people are extremely conservative. So they use Javanese language as a barrier because they want to keep to themselves. So the songs that they created, the songs that they released, were made for themselves. Some of the issues that they talk about in their songs, when I talk to them, might not be as relevant to other people, say like for those who live in Jakarta, or for people who like me were from Borneo, right? But that's the whole purpose of them rapping in Javanese. I call the group's politics as conservative politics because they are extremely conservative to the point where they look at themselves as the ambassadors of the Yogyakartan sort of culture, which the Sultan did make them to be one, but it got to the point where they weren't paying that much attention to spreading the Javanese culture anymore, so much as they were trying to enact barriers to keep Javanese in and to kick others out. So that's what I found. Yeah.
Which is an issue of regional autonomy too, right?
Yes.
In terms of that local regional pride, and like the students were just learning this 2 weeks ago. Yeah, regional autonomy. One of the issues with public servants, you only wanted to hire Javanese if you're in Central Java, and so it's got that, and this is reflected in music, hip hop music. Yeah, great. So I just wanted to know if anybody else has question. Otherwise, I have one main question.
So I've got a question, Monika. If my sound's working now. So so William, So in the United States, hip hop culture is very much rooted in, urban decay arising out of the late 70s, early 80s. And it is about urban decay, gangs, violence, drugs. That doesn't seem to be the basis of Indonesian hip hop. So we had your earlier example that was about overthrow Suharto, and when that happened, we had nothing more to do. But I did read the article about Papuan hip hop, which seems to be more about their social situation. Is there a hip hop movement in Indonesia that's more attuned with the experience of the United States and talking about urban decay, poverty, etc.?
Thank you so much for the question. That's so interesting. It's quite interesting that you talk about the Papuan issues, because my paper on that will be published in August. So I wrote about the regional politics of rappers, of Papuan rappers who are currently residing in Bali, and how they use their music to create this to influence this sort of Free West Papua movement and notion. But to get back to your question regarding urban decay and gang issues, there are actually groups in Indonesia. They are writing songs about gang culture that they experience. I am currently writing a paper on what I call the politics and aesthetics of gangster rap in Jakarta, in Tanjung Priok. So in Tanjung Priok is a port, like it's a major port in Jakarta, where people had to work. Many of them work menial labor. Many of the kids weren't able to go to uni, even though they live in Jakarta. When I went there in 2019, I was actually, it was a funny event, anthropologist and ethnographic study. I ended up touring with a motorcycle gang that rode the motorcycle up the highway in Jakarta, like, inside the toll road and stuff. But they were also rappers, and they were hardcore rappers. I might be able to show A to Kill. So I don't think the audio is shared here. Oop. Can you guys hear the audio?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
All right, let's hear this song a little bit, and then it'll give you a little bit more picture on how this youth in Jakarta, in Tanjung Priok, was feeling so marginalized that they weren't able to do anything, which is pretty similar to what happened in the US, right?
Yeah.
That is crime, everything I do. What you call that is crime, everything I do. Street to the street, hard life, this is our life. Fuck you.
Kesehatan dengan pengharapan adanya kemewahan, dengan suasana dan kenyamanan di tempat ini. Inilah tempat di mana dengan penuh kehitaman, kebaran debu asap menyelimuti tempat ini. Beralas aspal dengan kata-kata yang maning harus dijaki, tanpa atap tercamai sinar yang akan menghanguskan diri. Di setiap sisi sudut berisi teka-teki kehitaman. Inilah fakta nyata dalam arena this is speed. Hey homie boy, fuck you. Setan dengan kalian, kau akan mati di tempat ini. Ini bukan tempat kau, cepat pergi. Tak ada surga neraka yang akan dinikmati
I think that's enough expletive for the class. But so as you can tell, these people, when I talk to him, so his name is Adit Negro. This rapper's name, and the name A to Kill is because the both of them were Adits, so two Adit. The song was recorded on a stolen laptop, on a stolen microphone, on a side of a busy highway in North Jakarta. And all the stuff that they were singing about, that they were rapping about, was precisely that. They were complaining about all the negative notions, all the negative implications they were put upon them because they were from North Jakarta, because they were from the ghetto area of Jakarta. So quite similar notion with what was happening in the US and what is still currently happening in many parts of the US, right? So yeah, that's it.
Yep, thank you.
All good.
Wonderful. Anybody else have a last question?
Am I allowed to ask one more, Monica?
Yeah, go ahead.
So some of the stuff, so hip hop in the Middle East is, it picks up like, so traditional musical instruments and motifs into their music. Is there evidence of that in Indonesian hip hop?
Huh. Well, that's funny. There weren't as many of them in Indonesia. You have quite a lot of groups who sampled traditional instruments. For instance, Jogja Foundation, or we get some dangdut rap artists in Indonesia who sample gamelan, Balinese gamelan, kulintang, but not that many of them actually have that sort of traditional musical sounds or musical styles. Most of them focuses a lot more on like modern sort of musical background. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
All good?
Yep.
Okay, great. Wonderful. I just wanted to ask, just this week, we're focusing on globalization and youth language, right? So I'm just wondering about whether Indonesian hip hop have used like specifically youth language. Is that like the new 2016 thing? Like, can you hear that in the hip hop? Like, particularly, we call it bahasa gaul or socialized. Yeah. Is that a thing? And do you think, like, you arguing that hip hop isn't actually global influence to Indonesia, new anyway, but it's started from like what Chris was saying, traditional music, right?
Yep.
So I suppose there's two parts of it. Like, does globalization influence Indonesian hip hop traditionally? And is there kind of youth language in it that, does that then influence youth language? Does it have, like, I suppose there's a lot of expletive, you can call it. Maybe that's type of a feature of it, Yeah.
Yeah, globalization. I guess if you want to talk about hip hop, you're talking about globalized cultural products, a postmodern and globalized cultural products from the US, right? So the fact that they are using that, it already proves that. But what is happening in Indonesia, like what I said, was more of a localized cultural products at its current stage. So it's not so much as copying things from the US anymore. And that also impacts the language that they're using, which refers to your second question, right? That the language that people have been using in Indonesia, those youth rappers, yes, in the 80s and in the early 1990s, they were still pretty tame in their use of languages. Like they don't use gue, lu, and stuff like that. But towards the late 1990s, where around the fall of Suharto, that's when they started to use that. That's when they started to incorporate that, and it grows much bigger and much larger. Like the terms on the terms of using those sort of more casual, more informal languages. In the early 2000s, when people were able to actually buy recording equipment, and they don't need to rely on major labels anymore. So prior to that, major labels, after 2000s, when they don't need to rely on major labels, that's when they were able to speak what they want to speak. And that's when you can start to see how used languages, so words like lo, gue, and using all the other vernaculars started to grow back then.
And you can see that in kind of youth culture. Would you say hip hop is an Indonesian youth culture now after King? I can't remember his King.
Young Lex.
King Lex. Yeah.
Yes.
So he says, oh, we're calling this youth culture. It's no longer like the generation of 98 youth. Yeah.
It's a loaded question, because on one hand you can say that it is youth culture because there are a lot of younger people who are rapping, who are releasing the music. But the issue with calling it a youth culture is that many of the major players are still those older people, are still those who first performed in 1990s. Like they are still currently active as well. And as a matter of fact, you actually got a lot more senior rappers who are coming out of retirement now that they are in their 40s, early 50s, and started releasing songs again. So it's somewhat of a arguable point, I will say.
Great, thank you, thanks. So I have a, well, being 40s and a youth of 98, there is still a future in me to be part of a
Precisely.
global culture. Yeah, not that I can sing, but coming out of my 40s retirement.
Yep, time for you to release an EP.
Thank you so much. William, we need to get your articles. I think the articles I'm giving the students are all the articles, so it'll be great to get your articles as well. Yeah, maybe if any of the students want to do this essay on this week's topic, I'll do that. Okay.
Yep, for sure.
In the room, all good? No comments or question before William goes? You holding your head? Not a question? No. All right, no worries. Okay. Thank you so much, William.
Thank you so much for the invite.
Okay. I'll finish the recording now. Thank you those on Zoom.